Disclaimer: this is the second video in a two-part series. If you'd like to see an overview of pillow ball buggies, be sure to check the link in the description below for a previous part. Also, this video is sponsored by CowRC and A-Main Hobbies. Click the links in the description below. Like I said in the previous video, there are many different A-scale platforms for you to choose from in the modern RC racing world. So many that I couldn't really fit them all in the same video unless I wanted it to be an hour long. So in this video we'll be going over the seub cars that you can buy today. Before we begin, however, I have some house cleaning to keep up when it comes to part 1. In part 1 I said that WRC or WIRC no longer sells parts in the United States as they cut their ties with Senate RC. However, they have recently been partnered up with Adrenaline RC instead, and now you can find parts in the US again. With that out of the way, let's begin. So what exactly is a seub buggy, and what makes it different compared to a pillow ball buggy? Well, if you're well versed in the world of 10-scale off-road racing, especially four-wheel drive buggies, you already know what a seub car is, and that's the system used by every four-wheel drive buggy on the 10-scale market today, that I know of at least. There's a seub shape hub that houses the spindles and the axles. Like I said, if you're familiar with four-wheel buggies in the 10 scale space, you have a good idea of the layout for 8-scale buggies that use the seub style system. Even though seub cars aren't as popular as pillow balls due to their reduced durability and less aggressive handling style, they still very much have a place in the world of 8-scale racing due to their ease of use, generally use more user-friendly driver characteristics, and maintenance. Now that we have a reason as to why seub cars have a place in RC racing, why don't we go ahead and talk about our first brand, Kosho. Kosho has been in the world of 8-scale racing and racing in general longer than almost anyone, and this is reflected in their 8-scale race results over the years. As in the 8-scale space, Kosho has the most wins in the IFMAR 8-scale worlds compared to anyone else, winning a total of 8 times since 1992. I already did a history video on them, so if you want to check out that video, the link will be in the description. Even though Kosho have taken a back seat in the modern day world of RC with their last major win at IFMAR being back in 2010, the Koshos as a whole are still some of the most well sorted and easy to drive buggies on the market today. This is mostly thanks to their lead designer, Yuichi Kanai, a very good driver in his own right and an IFMAR winner himself. This leads me to his main achievement for Kosho, the Inferno platform. The modern day Kosho Inferno MP10 TKI3 and the MP10E TKI2 are, like I said before, some of the most well-sorted buggies you can buy out of the box. They tend to be very stable, and so long as you drive them calmly, they will behave calmly as well. Kosho buggies, especially their E-buggies, also tend to be a bit different from the norm compared to other standard buggies, from the small things like the design of the shock towers to large things like the layout of the battery system on the E-buggy being different than other saddle pack systems. If you're curious, the MP10E mounts them on each side of the center driveline to give it more stability. Of course, Kosho buggies aren't all sunshine and roses, and there are a few reasons why someone might want to steer clear of them. For one, there's the updating system. When there are other companies come out with a new platform, for example Mugen coming out with the MBX8R a few years ago, the Eco version came out not too long after, almost at the same time. And in the case of the B4 and B4E, they both came out at roughly the same time. Well, by contrast, the E-buggy version of the MP10 is still a generation behind the Nitro version. The Nitro is the TKI3, whereas the E-buggy is the TKI2. You might say since the parts are already out there to make the E-buggy a TKI3, there isn't much of a problem, until you realize that doing so is very expensive. Next up, we have the fact that Kosho, even though are very good in terms of fit and finish, they don't have the best reputation for holding together during really bad crashes. Now don't get me wrong. Every buggy I've mentioned thus far and any I will mention going forward are very durable, including the Kosho platform. However, some platforms are more durable than others, and the Kosho platform just doesn't have the same reputation that other buggies do in terms of toughness. And since support is very much locked to where you happen to be at the time, this can be an issue. Overall, if you want a very stable and easy to drive platform and you don't mind being a little bit different, the Kosho MP10 platform is probably for you. However, if you want an actual tank, may I recommend our next brand. Techno as a brand is quite the opposite of Kosho in terms of age, with Techno being a relatively recent brand that used to just make hop-up parts and conversion kits for other cars. Nowadays, Techno is by far one of the most prolific and well-known brands in the world of RC racing in the United States. So much so that when someone asks which brand they should go for if they're new to racing, Techno will usually be one of the first answers. The current platform for the Techno brand is the NB48 2.1 and the EB48 2.1, with the truggy versions also being very popular. But why exactly is Techno so popular in the United States specifically? Well, we can first start with the obvious. Techno kits are damn near indestructible. This is due to a few reasons. For one, everything Techno builds are up to very high tolerances and standards. So in terms of fit and finish, they're very much up there with other high-end brands. Another thing that makes them durable compared to other brands is the fact that everything is just, well, bigger. Arms are more solid and heavier, the chassis is 4mm thick instead of the usual 3, and overall the buggies are very hard to build incorrectly due to manuals on Technos being very good at explaining both clearly and in detail what you're supposed to do. Not only that, but if some by miracle you happen to break something on your car, the part support for Techno from local tracks to very large events tend to be very good. This again goes back to them being very popular. As for how they drive, well, to call them delicate would be a lie, but on a more rough and tumble track like you see here, and on most US style tracks in general, the Techno platform is very easy to handle compared to most other buggies as a whole. They tend to be very controllable and most of all forgiving out of the box. They don't punish you for misinputs very much. And in terms of setup support, there are plenty out there for various skill levels and various tracks. So with these upsides when it comes to Techno, there are many things going for it. However, there are also mainly two things that sort of bring Techno down in my opinion. Let's start with the thing that actually has to do with the car itself. Remember when I said the Techno platform as a whole wouldn't be considered delicate? Well, this can be both a good and a bad thing depending on what kind of driver you are. Not only that, but if you live in Europe, Techno is almost a non-factor for you. Especially on high grip tracks where dirt is treated or the track is made of AstroTurf. They simply don't do well in scenarios like that because they simply weren't designed for it. Yes, you can make them work, and some drivers absolutely have in the past, but if you want a high grip track machine, the EB and NB simply aren't that. The other big setback for Techno is, well, some of their fans. Brand loyalty is something that I accept in pretty much anything. People like to bicker and chide over their favorite brands all the time. What bothers me is when people will take it too far. To get to the point, Techno seems to have a higher concentration of those people. You know, those people. The people who say they'll never buy anything but their favorite brand no matter what, the kind of people who waste their time arguing on Facebook about their favorite RC car, and occasionally spout racial slurs to small YouTubers because they didn't talk at length about Techno in a video. However, if the worst thing I can say about a car brand is its fan base is too ravenous and loyal, you're probably doing something right. Overall, Techno is a very good brand for those of us who don't really want to take the time to work on or fix our cars when they break, which is pretty much everyone. But if you're like me and a little bit turned off by Techno for various reasons, may I suggest HB, or Hot Bodies Racing. HB Racing as a company used to be part of HPI before splitting away right before HPI was sued by Traxxas over a rubber seal. I kid you not. After HPI was sort of put down by lawsuits and lack of sales, at the time Hot Bodies as they were known would become a mainstay in the world of RC racing, from on-road touring cars to big boy A-scale buggies. Over time, they've garnered a very good reputation here in the States and are usually a mainstay in most A-scale RC tracks around the country. The current platform for the HB line is going to be the D8 and E8 World Spec. However, if you're going to buy an HB, I would go with the previous Gen 819 RS for reasons I'll get to later but for now, let's focus on the positives. One of the biggest positives about HB as a whole is how simple they are compared to other buggies, especially regarding their e-buggy. It's a simple battery on one side, electronics on the other. It's a proven setup that works well. Also, because of this simple design, the buggies can handle a decent amount of punishment, and if anything goes wrong, it's usually pretty easy to fix. Not only that, but because HP is so popular, it's very well supported not just at national level events, but also at a club level, specifically in the US. Unfortunately, everything isn't all sunshine and roses at HB right now, and this leads me to the actual kit itself. It would seem that the new world spec car isn't to everyone's expectations at the moment, and because of this, people are taking parts from the old RS and putting them on the world spec to make it drive better on US style tracks. From what I can tell from my own buggy, the old 819 RS, it drives very well, but I've seen other HB guys either stick with the old car or not really struggle but not do as well with the new one. Luckily, a lot of the parts are interchangeable, so you don't have to worry too much about parts. The second big problem for HB specifically in Europe would have to be their cost and their scarcity. Seriously, after looking at some of the prices of things like seubs, arms, and other wear parts in the buggy, I can understand why HB isn't as big in Europe as it is in the US. Now I know I didn't spend too long talking about HB in this video, mostly because, to be honest, there isn't much to say about them that I haven't said about other brands as well. They're high quality, well put together, and very well driving cars that will take you very far. However, if you want to go even further and take your racing even more seriously than you do already, may I suggest our next brand, Mako. Mako is a European company run mostly by JQ, a very knowledgeable Finnish driver who has done a lot of work prior in the world of RC racing. Mako is his latest venture, and it's doing pretty well at most parts of the world, but is doing especially well in places like the Caribbean, Central, and South America. Currently, the main Mako platform is the MX-8 Buggy, and there's also an e-Buggy, Truggy, and e-Truggy on the way, more than likely in 2024 or 2025 for the Truggies. However, with the soon-to-be released cars like the Truggy and e-Buggy, you'll see some people already have them in their possession, or at least prototypes of them. Are they just paid drivers, or what exactly is going on here? Well, this is a perfect time to talk about how exactly Mako as a brand works. As of right now, you can buy the Mako MX-8 Nitro Buggy for the regular price of a buggy. You will also be able to do so once the final iteration of the e-Buggy and Truggies are released. However, if you want to take your racing more seriously and wish to be more of a team-like structure, they have what's called the Mako membership. The membership costs about $430 a year or $35 a month. You'll be entered into the Mako team, so to speak. You'll gain access to their Discord server, where they hold regular meetings and calls with their members to help improve their driving. Along with this, you'll get access to prototype parts and an entire prototype cars, like for example the e-Buggy I mentioned before. Whether or not you consider this to be worth it depends on how much you get out of learning and being in a learning environment. But for now, I'm not going to talk about the Mako membership. What's about the platform? Well, the MX-8 is probably one of the most tunable A-scale buggies on the market today. If you're a fanatic when it comes to tuning a buggy exactly the way you want for your track, and really enjoy doing so, the MX-8 platform will deliver you that in spades. Also, I know this is subjective, but I think the MX-8 is probably one of the best looking buggies out there on the market. As for how they drive, even though on US style tracks they tend to struggle a little bit compared to more of the US centric cars I've mentioned already, on a smooth, more maintained tracks like you'll see in Europe or in permit tracks like Lumbunil RC Complex, the Mako MX-8 does pretty well. After things that bring the MX-8 down, well, like I said before, the e-Buggy isn't out yet, so if that's your thing, then the decision has already been made for you. Also, even though the cost of your entry into the membership is pretty normal when you take into account everything your average racer buys over the course of a year, most people I know don't really like to spend that level of money all at once. Also, according to Mako themselves, only a certain amount of cars are built a year, so if you happen to want one when they're out of stock, well, tough luck. You're gonna have to wait. Overall though, if you want a really tunable buggy and you want to take your racing very seriously, I would recommend the Mako project as a whole. However, if you want something a little bit weird, we have our next brand, Agama. Agama as a company has always been on the back burner in terms of global relevance for the most part. They have pockets of popularity here and there, especially in their native UK, but for the most part they were always just kind of around, until the N1 was teased. Even though different buggies have different designs, for the most part they don't deviate from the basic formula in terms of general layout set up by Kanai with the Burns and Inferno all those years ago. In the N1, on the other hand, they decided to try something a bit different in terms of shock layout. They use a setup where the N1 shocks are laid down on the top where the shock tower would be. The idea is to create a consistent shock package throughout the entire run without having to worry about side load. It's a weird design, but one that does have some level of merit, as they have done well at many local tracks and many local races in the UK, and even some here where I live, down in the Loganville RC complex. It also seems to excel on high grip tracks where droop isn't really much of a need. Unfortunately, this leads me to the negatives of the Agama platform as a whole. First off, we have the unfortunate side effect of the design of the N1, and that's the lack of droop. Because of the way the shocks are built, you only have so much down travel on the actual shock shafts. As a result, you're not going to be able to soak up bumps and big jumps like you can with other platforms. As a result, at big arena tracks like Western US tracks, and in general where the surface gets a lot more ruddy and bumpy, the N1 starts to struggle a bit compared to the more traditional setup. Secondly, the biggest problem for Agama at the moment is finding parts for them. I don't really know any hobby shops in the country that carry Agama parts outside of Nemo, and they seem to be out of stock with the buggies themselves. So even if you wanted to buy the N1, or N1E as they'll come out soon, you can't buy one as the time of me writing the script. At the end of the day though, I commend Agama for actually trying something very different and actually making it work, especially with the VRP piston package, which solves the droop issue I mentioned before. However, if you don't want to try something different and you want something that's backed by an RC giant, I'll recommend our next brand, TLR. Now I've done a history video on TLR in the past, so I won't go too far into it here. What I will say is that much like AE, or Associated, TLR have been in the racing world for a long while and have a history of doing pretty well at many different races around the country and even the world. Their 8 buggy has been around for a long while at this point, but they've incrementally changed it over time to meet modern needs. One benefit, or drawback depending on your perspective, is the fact that the 8 has over other buggies is the fact that you can buy it as a nitro or e-buggy at the same time. All the parts needed to make it a nitro buggy and all the parts needed to make it an 8 e-buggy are all included in the kit for you. This is unfortunately reflected in the price of the kit, as out of all the kits I've mentioned up until now, this one is the most expensive. As for how the 8 drives, well, this is where we're going to run into another snag. You see, much like their A-scale or 10-scale platform, the A-scale 8 buggy is a bit behind other buggies in terms of geometry and option parts. Now this isn't much of an issue if the 8 in A-scale in general. The E819RS that I have has been around forever. The issue lies, however, in the geometry of the buggy and what you have to do to get it to drive better for the average racer. TLR buggies as a whole are designed around 2 drivers, Dakota Fend and Tater Sontag. This is a good thing if you're those 2 people, but not so good if you're literally anyone else. The 8 buggy is a hard buggy to drive out of the box, and to make it more manageable, lots of TLR team drivers have gone on to use many different aftermarket parts. What this sort of creates is a hodgepodge of different option parts that different drivers run, and trying to keep track of it can be annoying. As for part support, well, considering how big Horizon Hobby is, you'd expect places to be full of parts for them, but unfortunately, this isn't the case as lots of parts end up being out of stock a lot of the time online. For 10th scale, this isn't as much of an issue, as most tracks with hobby shops next to them will stock TLR parts, but for A scale, I don't see too many mobile shops stocking many TLR parts, unfortunately. The good thing about the TLR8 is the fact that, much like the Mugen I mentioned before, you could have one buggy and stick with it for a long time. No need to upgrade every 1.5 years. It gives you time to master the actual platform. Overall, the 8 platform is a good one for A scale, but to be honest, I think there are better options at the moment for less in the seub world. Another brand I want to go over briefly is the Sparco F8 and soon to be F8E. Since the Sparco is a very new brand to the RC racing world, I don't have a whole lot on their accomplishments. What I will say is they plan on making some big moves come 2024, so be sure to keep an eye on them. Now, the F8 Buggy and soon to be F8E are your standard seub car in the market, with one exception. It uses an upper A-arm system like you'd see on a pillowball car, but it's attached to a seub. This allows you to tune the car's stiffness a bit better and gives you a bit more durability. Now, for how it drives, Out of the box, well, from what I can see, it seems very stable and easy to drive, even on this mixed track surface. But it feels a little bit similar between its seub car and a pillowable car, obviously because of the upper A-arm system. Where it seems to fit into the market is in Europe, where companies like Techno and HB are not as popular or too expensive respectively, and if you don't want to get a Kosho but you still want a seub car. It'll be hard to see where it'll fit in the US or upside down, but we'll have to wait and see. For the final brand I wish to go over, I will briefly go over Serpent. If you're wondering why they didn't get an animation, it's simply because I forgot they existed until my friend Rylan reminded me and sent me some footage of his going around the track. Thanks for that. Serpent is best known for on-road cars, and for the most part they have been very successful there. They also have seemed to have a bit of an off-road presence in places like the UK and some parts of the US. I can't really say much when it comes to their quality or driving characteristics, but what I will say from what I've seen and being able to briefly hold, it does drive very similarly to other seub cars and doesn't really hit you with many surprises when driving. If any of you guys watching run Serpent 8-scale buggies or Serpent buggies in general, be sure to let me know what you think in the comment section below. And just like that, we've covered every single 8-scale platform I could find. If you guys enjoyed the video, and the videos in general, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Any clip helps. Also, if you want to support me another way, be sure to check out my Patreon, where I post updates to when my videos are going to come out. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Logan Jutkins, and especially Morrison Wad and Buddy Howell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.